Well, this was an assignment. This was my first studio feature. It was offered to me, and I thought, I can't turn this down. But I was not anxious to remake this movie. So my idea was to make it as true to our time in the 80s as Hawks was to his time in the 50s.
U.S. number 31 calling McMurdo. Come in, over. U.S. number 31 calling McMurdo. Urgent. Come in, over.
Welcome to another installment of our John Carpenter series, where we explore many of his iconic films in great detail. I'm not going to lie that I suspect this series will most likely be one of our most in-depth to date, so expect this to be no less than 4 to 5 parts, as we intend to go over the genesis of the film, multiple adaptations, scripts, behind the scenes, and massive depth of the film itself, including all theories out there that we could find. So without further delay, let's dive in. In 1928, John Campbell began writing science fiction when he was 18 at MIT. For years, he established himself as a science fiction writer under 2 names. One was Don A. Stewart, and the other his own name. He focused less on his writing when he became the editor of Astounding Science Fiction. In his new position, he continued to make an impact for science fiction because he discovered and helped the careers of such prolific writers as Robert A. Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and Theodore Sturgeon. Among his many stories, John Campbell's Who Goes There is often considered his most famous work, published in the August 1938 issue of Astounding Science Fiction. The story had 12 chapters. The novella begins in the Arctic with a large team in a room with the remains of a frozen alien thawing at the center. The second-in-command MacReady dumps a large block of exposition consisting of heady dialogue describing the environment, finding the alien craft, and the creature they found. Many of the characters in Carpenter's adaptation are in this story. There's Blair, a biologist, bald and eager to inspect the thing. Gary is in charge, logical and methodical. MacReady is a second-in-command, balanced and practically perfect. Norris, a physicist who is very cautious about doing anything with the frozen creature because he is having nightmares about it, specifically of it changing form and causing harm to the group. Copper is a doctor in this version. Clark and Bennings are there as well as 20 other humans. They assign a man to guard the thawing creature overnight, and when morning arrives, everyone is awakened and discover that the creature ran away after the guard fell asleep during his watch. Shortly after, the sound of angry dogs twist into howls in the distance. When they run to the dogs, they see the thing, and they burn and electrocute the creature. When finished, Blair states that the creature digests life forms and then imitates them when finished. It is then that Blair reveals that he destroyed all the vehicles to leave the facility, to keep the thing from leaving the continent. Blair then goes crazy, treating everyone like they are a thing. He also refuses to eat anything unless it is sealed in cans, and then the team come up with a blood test for humans. But it is corrupted, and Gary becomes one of the suspects who might have done it. Gary willingly gives up his position, so command falls to MacReady, and everyone questions who might be a thing. An interesting note about this novella is that it spends a lengthy amount of time explaining that simple cells can revive after freezing, but more complicated life forms like man do not, because multiple parts of the body are dependent on the whole working properly to function, and if one element is off, resuscitating is impossible. There are also debates in the book when people ask themselves if they are a thing and wondering what they would know if they were a copy. Even cows who are consumed by the thing continue making milk, and dogs that bit things begin transforming themselves as if they caught an infection. So everyone locks themselves up. There are a lot of psychological and logical debates on what to do. Before it ends, humans kill humans and things. But when they attack a thing that played dead, MacReady notices its body changes, and therefore gets the idea that every cell of the thing runs for survival if in mortal danger. So he comes up with the idea of a blood test, very similar to Carpenter's film. The test works, and 2 humans are discovered to be things and are dealt with. After the men determine who is real and who is a copy, they go to test Blair, who is boarded up. When they find Blair, he is a creature complete with tentacles and multiple eyes. They try to shoot it, stab it, and burn it. The description of the thing is gruesome, using the words bubbling, sprouting, and licking like descriptive poetry. After dealing with Blair, they find that the creature was creating something with atomic energy from parts in their camp. The creature was a half-hour away from finishing this teleportation device. And then they focus on an albatross flying above, and they wonder if it's a thing, and then the story ends. Who Goes There was written when the alliance between the United States and Russia was falling apart and communists were seen as betrayers and enemies. In fact, President Truman decreed that anyone working on a federal level had to be screened for loyalty to the United States per his executive order number 9835. This was before McCarthyism started in 1950, but Americans did fear the danger within, and this is exactly what the book mirrored of its society at that time. This novella was very focused on paranoia and isolation, and yet for its time, it was extremely violent. It was also very popular, so much so that it became a hardcover book in 1948, and it was just a matter of time before people in Hollywood noticed it. In 1950, 2 screenplay writers, Charles Lederer and Ben Hecht, convinced producer Howard Hawks to buy the rights to Who Goes There. Campbell was open to the idea, and he sold it for $1,250. The First Thing film was vastly different from the book, obviously because back in the 1950s, a pulsating monster that digests you and turns into you violently was not a typical film-going experience. They also didn't have a ton of money. Originally, they planned for a blue-skinned, 3-eyed monster, but obviously they didn't have the money for that. So a lot of the book was changed, and although the film focused on an outpost that finds an alien in a block of ice and thaws it out, it's not like the novella at all. Instead of the alien consuming and copying other life forms, this thing was more like Frankenstein in appearance with Dracula's thirst for blood. The creature had more in common literally with vegetables, as it grew vegetable pods to reproduce thanks to the blood it collected. The result of all this is that the members of the outpost must keep together to defend against the creature. In the end, they douse the thing in fire, which was the first full-body fire stunt ever, and later they would electrocute the creature to kill it. The Thing from Another World is an enjoyable film, and it's on AFI's film list. And I recommend it to anyone who respects films for what they were when they came out, especially science fiction fans. It's perfect for those who love stuff like classic science fiction, such as Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, and Forbidden Planet. The Thing from Another World was released when McCarthyism was all the rage, and you would think the film would have used these themes from Who Goes There to champion the American anti-communism agenda. However, the film took a more generic approach to horror, and therefore it seemed very separate from the material it came from. The film released on April 27, 1951, and it made $1.9 million, which was really well for the time. The movie did better than the classic The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was also released the same year. Who Goes There remained in the zeitgeist and was rehashed by other media as well. In 1958, a radio drama called Exploring Tomorrow narrated Who Goes There under the title The Escape. It was actually hosted by John W. Campbell himself. Two people who were vital in the creation of the 1982 version were young at this time, and the first was, of course, John Carpenter. As a young teen, he loved movies while growing up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and he made many of his own short horror films on his 8mm camera. Examples of his home movies were a claymation Godzilla and a sci-fi western with a one-eyed creature. He was a big fan of westerns and event films like Godzilla and the Forbidden Planet. But one of his favorites was, you guessed it, The Thing from Another World, which he would see after its initial release. Another person critical to making the 1982 The Thing was Stuart Cohen, who was also young at this time, and he not only loved the movie, but read Who Goes There when he was 12 years old. But no series lasted forever. For a short period, Who Goes There and The Thing from Another World became media of the past as new films took over the market, but it would not remain dormant for long. John Carpenter entered college in Bowling Green, but would then transfer to USC School of Cinematic Arts, where he met and became buddies with Stuart Cohen. The two often talked about how much they loved The Thing from Another World, and little did they know that in the future they would work together to recreate Who Goes There. But while this was going on, Who Goes There returned. Well, sort of. This time it was copied in a good way, which is in itself ironic. During September 1972, a loose adaptation of Who Goes There was produced from Spanish-British studios. The film had Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and Telly Savalas, and it was called Horror Express. American audiences could see the film in November 1973. Technically, the film was not based off Who Goes There, but there are a ton of similarities that just cannot be missed. In the film, an anthropologist, played by Christopher Lee, is on a train heading home after finding frozen remains of something he discovered in Manchuria. The creature thaws out and begins copying and killing people on the train by absorbing their memories and skills. Eventually, it is discovered that the creature is extraterrestrial, and it can communicate and wants to build a new spaceship to escape the planet which it has been stranded on for millions of years. The Thing in this movie can also resurrect those it kills like zombies in an effort to protect itself. However, none of this helps the creature survive, and in the end, it is disposed of in a fiery train crash. If you're into horror films, it's an entertaining film. While Horror Express was being made and released, John Carpenter was embroiled with the production of his student film that grew out of hand with Dan O'Bannon called Dark Star. O'Bannon and Carpenter met at USC, and just to show how enthusiastic Carpenter was about The Thing, the first conversation he had with O'Bannon was about how much they loved Howard Hawks' The Thing from Another World. They started making Dark Star in 1970, and finally on March 30th, 1974, it would be released and subsequently expanded to other theaters through time. Dark Star was considered very creative for a student film, but this is what O'Bannon had to say about it.
And instead of the most impressive student film ever made, we had the least impressive professional film ever made.
Dark Star allowed Carpenter to make Assault on Precinct 13 in 1976, and after that he was tapped to make Halloween, which everyone would soon know. But before that, in 1976, John Carpenter's old friend Stuart Cohen, who was currently producing television projects, decided to pitch the idea for Who Goes There to the Terman Foster Company, owned by David Foster and Lawrence Terman. The company Stuart Cohen pitched to, the Truman Foster Company, produced such things as The Drowning Pool, First Love, and Heroes. Before they teamed up, Terman was most noted for producing The Graduate and The Great White Hope, while David Foster was involved with producing The Getaway. Both producers liked the idea of making Who Goes There, so Cohen, Terman, and Foster went to Universal Studios together to pitch the idea. During that pitch, Stuart Cohen's angle when presenting his idea was the key direction for the future picture. The Thing is a film about paranoia, the monster in all men, which is the phrase I used when I sold the film to Universal in 1977. Cohen's vision was not to remake The Thing from another world, but to adapt Who Goes There and focus on the paranoid themes that made that work so frightening and disturbing. Universal was on board and they decided to make Stuart Cohen the co-producer, while David Foster and Lawrence Terman would take the mantle as main producers. The annoying thing about all this is that if you look up Wikipedia, as of the date of this video, only Lawrence Terman and David Foster are credited as those who got the ball rolling for this project, which is simply not the case. The first hurdle was that the studio had to get the rights to both Who Goes There and The Thing from Another World. The current holders of the novella rights were Hal Barwood and Matthew Robbins. The writing team was involved in such films as Sugarland Express, Corvette Summer, and later Dragon Slayer, Legend of Billie Jean, and Batteries Not Included. They were close friends to Steven Spielberg and would help him in polishing the scripts on Jaws and paramountly Close Encounters of the Third Kind, even though they were not given full credit for their inclusion with those projects. You can explore those details in both our series covering those films. Because these two men were so experienced and had worked with Universal in the past, the studio did not hesitate to offer them the job as writers, but they passed as they were just too busy. So Universal offered to buy the rights from the writers, and they agreed. The rights to The Thing from Another World belonged to Wilbur Stark, who was a television and radio producer. When the studio bought the rights, there was a condition that he would appear as an executive producer in name only on all print advertisements, posters, TV spots, and press material. With that, the studio greenlit The Thing in 1977. At first, Universal turned to Tobe Hooper and his writing partner, Kim Henkel. Hooper made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974. The movie was monumental, costing $140,000 and eventually making $30 million. Hooper had a contract with Universal and was a perfect choice to make this film because the very genesis of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre was Tobe Hooper's genuine belief that people were the true monsters, and that was the key element of his movie. This matched Stuart Cohen's pitch to the letter. During this period, despite this sounding perfect, Hooper and his writer Kim Henkel discussed making the movie with a man hunting the thing obsessively, like Captain Ahab hunting Moby Dick. Of course, this is not what the three producers wanted to hear, and they decided to pass on Hooper's ideas, so he was never hired for the project. They tried to bring in writer Bill Lancaster, who was hot off writing The Bad News Bears, but Lancaster stated he had the impression that they wanted to remake The Thing from Another World, and he was not interested in doing that. Now, in truth, Cohen always wanted John Carpenter to direct, as they were not only friends, but they both had a passion for the project because they talked about it back in their college days. It was always my goal to have John make this movie. In 1980, with events reaching critical mass, I finally got my wish. Carpenter was discussed, but the studio did not like the idea at the time. Up until then, Carpenter was a small fry director in the eyes of the studio, and he was simply just an independent filmmaker, not a big budget one. He had only done Dark Star and Assault on Precinct 13 up to that point, so the producers moved on as they had to please the studio. Meanwhile, they would find a writer in legendary author William F. Nolan, who wrote the original Logan's Run and subsequent sequels. Nolan had also recently wrote a screenplay for Burnt Offerings. While Nolan got to work on the treatment, the director search would continue. John Landis was considered, but his biggest film to date were Schlock and the Kentucky Fried Movie. Landis's approach in films seemed more comedic, and in the end, he just wasn't considered right for this project. Finally, Nolan brought his treatment to the team on April 1978, and it went something like this. Everything begins at an Antarctica outpost that consists of 9 men and 3 women. We follow a weather balloon launched as it views the base and the surrounding areas as it heads out over to a camp where 3 of the outpost's men are working on getting samples. Something flies overhead and crashes. Thinking it's a meteor, they get into their snowcat to check it out. While heading there, they radio the coordinates they're going to check out. When they get there, they discover an alien scout ship of some kind big enough for a crew of 3, and they notice an opening in the side of the craft. At first, they are trepidatious, but then they soon give in to curiosity and enter the craft. After they enter, the opening seals itself behind them. We then cut back to the outpost where the trio of explorers, who found the ship, return. They are met by McCready, leader of the camp. He asks if they found anything, and the group says they found nothing. Next to McCready is a pack dog named Macho, who stares suspiciously at the 3 men who lie about finding the spaceship. That night, the wife of one of the men who found the ship is plagued by bad dreams. In those dreams, she imagines her husband is trying to kill her, and when she goes to the chief doctor, Blair, it is dismissed as nothing to worry about. However, the next night, she lies in bed with her husband, sleeping soundly while he stares at her unblinking. The next morning, the cook Norris notices that their dog, Macho, is missing, while a team goes out on a snowcat to find a downed weather balloon. They find the balloon, and they also find the outpost's favorite dog, Macho, dead. When autopsied, Blair says he can't explain how the dog died. Blair also treats the wife, who is plagued by nightmares, by giving her a sedative. The wife explains that there is weird seismic activity underneath the base, and she needs to look at it closer. But for now, she's going to bed. That night, while the wife is suffering from more nightmares, the door to the bedroom opens. The husband next to her notices the other 2 men that found the ship with him. After the door shuts, he grabs his wife firmly, while his eyes, mouth, and hands turn into slimy tendrils and enter into every pore of the woman's body as she struggles hopelessly. Then the man that was her husband seemingly drains and dies. The next morning, she tells Blair that her dreams are gone and she feels better. When asked about the seismic activity she mentioned before, she brushes it off like it's nothing. Then someone reports a snowcat is missing and her husband is gone. She states he left during the night and didn't want to wake anyone as he needed to collect some more samples. But McCready is not satisfied. He orders a copter to find the tractor that can't be communicated with because, for some reason, the radio is down at the facility. In the copter is a pilot and one of the 3 that found the alien ship in the beginning. The copter goes up and eventually lands by the alien craft. The pilot exits the craft, now a copy. The dead, deflated body of his co-pilot is put in the alien spaceship, and then the spaceship is destroyed by a laser of some type before the copter pilot returns to the chopper. When the chopper arrives at base, McCready asks, "Where's the co-pilot?" And the pilot responds that he dropped him off at McMurdo Base for a medical emergency. Appendix attack for sure. I knew Blair couldn't handle it. Since there is no radio, the team can't verify his claim. That night, the 3 doppelgangers are digging tunnels deep under the base, with the laser tools we saw the alien ship destroyed with. The cook Norris stumbles into the area of the base where there are loose floorboards and discovers the entrance to this cave system. Curiously, he goes down where he discovers the 3 aliens digging. He asks what they're doing, and they advance on him. Panic occurs, and Norris hacks at one of the approaching things with a knife. But after contact, there is no blood. Instead, there is light and tendrils. Norris turns to run, but before he gets away, tendrils grab him, and the body the alien inhabited before Norris drops like an empty sack behind him as Norris turns into a copy. The next morning, MacReady's wife, Liz, tells him that another snowcat is missing and a note was left for him. It reads, "Can't take the thought of being holed up here all winter, so I'm going to join the others at McMurdo. Sorry." With 3 of the 12 original crew of the base gone, MacReady jumps into action. He realizes the 3 that are currently missing are the original 3 who found nothing at the start of our story, so he goes to check out the coordinates they reported where they found nothing. After going there, MacReady returns with a piece of black metal that remained from the crashed alien craft. Blair cannot analyze it. MacReady does a meeting and informs everyone that the group of 3 lied about finding something out there, and now they're all gone. The radio is dead, and afterwards, a worried crew member approaches a mechanic. The mechanic pretends to comfort the person, but then tries to grab them as it turns into a thing. It is then that the body of the mechanic is crushed, but no blood emanates from the corpse. Instead, alien tendrils escape the body and consume the person trying to defend themselves, leaving only 5 people left that are human at the base. Shortly after, the power to the station begins to go in and out for some reason. The problem cannot be identified. That night, as the temperature is lowered, MacReady's wife goes into a hydroponics room where Blair is standing. She asks him if he's okay, and he states he broke one of her plants. She looks, and there is a plant on the ground. Then Blair leaves. She stands there for a moment, a little rattled, until she shockingly discovers a sucked-dry corpse of one of the vessels for the doppelganger aliens, stuffed in a locker. The next scene has Blair MacReady and his wife examining the human shell, and Blair states he can't explain it. They then part. MacReady states to his wife that he thinks all the missing people suffered the same fate as the body she found, and Blair can't be trusted. He links everything to whatever the team denied finding: the seismic disturbances under the facility, the radio out, and the power drain. MacReady and his wife go back to the greenhouse, where Blair was found, to look for clues. They pass 2 tech guys who report they still can't figure out what's going on with the generator and radio. MacReady keeps his wife close and tells them to keep working on it. When they walk away, one tech turns into the thing and consumes the other, leaving only MacReady and his wife as the only humans at the base. The couple find the loose floorboards in the greenhouse and discover the dug alien tunnels leading below. They go into them and make sure to return the floorboards to normal to disguise their movements. Meanwhile, the 3 remaining aliens meet up. They drop the body of the last human and calmly, slowly, march their way to the greenhouse. Below, MacReady and his wife discover an alien spaceship, which is described as gigantic, as huge as an Empire State Building, laying on its side. MacReady muses that this ship must have been buried in the ice for some time, and whatever is taking over their people were after it, and they were using the generator to help bring power back to the ship. The 3 aliens then appear, led by Blair, and they enter the ship, while MacReady and his wife stealthily slip aboard. They witness the aliens shedding their skins and prepping for ship takeoff. They enter an atmosphere bubble, and MacReady tries to fire at one of the aliens with his pistol. The aliens speak to him by using a form of translation device, stating that they want to leave peacefully and only harmed out of necessity to disguise themselves. If they don't leave now, MacReady and his wife will die. But MacReady's wife, Liz, grabs an alien laser pistol, and she fires at them. And the shot is perfect, as it causes the atmosphere that the aliens are in to turn toxic, and they immediately die as the ship goes into a self-destruct mode. MacReady and his wife race up the tunnels, get into a garage, start up a helicopter, and fly away before the craft explodes beneath, destroying the ice shelf and everything else. Then they're shown flying away to safety. This version did have a lot of tense moments, but was more like Horror Express, Body Snatchers, or The Puppet Masters, in that the thing jumps from body to body, and in the end, Nolan's ideas were passed on. They tried another novelist named David Wiltz, but he didn't work out either. After being in pre-production for some time, Universal was losing faith in the project, but the three core producers toiled away. However, with no director and another failed writer, for the moment, the project seemed to be in limbo. For over half a year, the Universal-backed The Thing seemed to be languishing in development hell, with failed writers and no director to helm the project. One of those directors passed over in 1977 was John Carpenter, but now, in late 1978, he was becoming a phenomenon. When his Halloween movie became a huge event, it was no less than a cultural milestone. But Universal still hesitated on the project, even though they were more amenable to hiring Carpenter. The problem was, horror and science fiction were not seen as in demand in the 70s, and the studio was not eager to pull the trigger. But then Alien came out, and Universal was not only stunned by the film's success, but was eager to follow that film's approach to science fiction. So finally, they gave in to Stuart Cohen's original vision to hire Carpenter for the film. It was Cohen who approached Carpenter again. As mentioned previously, Carpenter was a huge fan of The Thing from Another World and Who Goes There, and this was advertised to all, because on Halloween, The Thing from Another World was predominantly front and center on the television when the kids were watching TV as Michael Myers was up to no good. Despite his love for the movie, when Carpenter was approached for The Thing, he was not enthusiastic. I really didn't want to get near it. Carpenter was currently interested in making a Howard Hawks type western called El Diablo, as well as working on The Fog. Every script they showed Carpenter for The Thing was just awful in Carpenter's words, and when they encouraged Carpenter to write his own project, this really made him wary of the project, because he recently struggled to write a screenplay for the Philadelphia Experiment, and he didn't want to repeat that experience. But his old USC school buddy, producer Stuart Cohen, kept encouraging him to join the project. Carpenter was blunt to his friend. "You guys have failed 3 times. Why do I want to sign on to a failed project?" But his friendship to Cohen caused John to reluctantly agree to help develop a script and look at the source material for ideas. That was when he reread Who Goes There. I reread the novella and I thought, this is a pretty good story here. We get the right writer, the right situation, we could do something. One of the things in the novella that really inspired Carpenter to work on the project was when MacReady used a hot metal to test blood. The blood test scene is the reason I did the movie. I thought I could do something special with it. To keep things moving, the producers approached other writers, like the great Richard Matheson, who penned I Am Legend and Stir of Echoes. Nigel Neal was approached, and he would later work on Halloween 3 as an uncredited writer. And Derek Washburn, who wrote Silent Running and The Deer Hunter, but none of them worked out. The producers then returned to writer Bill Lancaster in August 1979. Lancaster was the son of Burt Lancaster. Like Carpenter, he turned down the project in 1977. Lancaster was on a winning streak after writing The Bad News Bears and The Bad News Bears Go to Japan. Since turning down the project, he reread Who Goes There, and now word was going around town that Carpenter was being courted for the project. After hearing all that, he was more amenable to the project. He was asked to give some ideas, and Lancaster met with Carpenter in August 1979. Lancaster stated he wanted to adhere strictly to the novella, and Carpenter agreed. He also wanted to set the movie in the Antarctic, where there was no rescue possible, rather than Alaska, where rescue was feasible. So while Lancaster went off to write, Carpenter returned to finish The Fog. The production of The Fog is significant to The Thing because two key people who worked on that movie would go on to work for The Thing. The first was Dean Cundey, who was the director of photography. Cundey had worked with Carpenter on Halloween and would go on to work with him in Escape from New York. The second key person was Rob Bottin. Bottin did some special effects on the film and played the ghostly Blake. He was hired thanks to introductions from his buddy Dean Cundey. Bottin would return to work for Carpenter again on The Thing, but first he had to go off to work on a little film called The Howling. Often, Carpenter would meet to talk about the direction of Lancaster's script, and for a short time the writer struggled with dialogue and the confined elements of the story. When Lancaster finished the first 40 pages, a lot of changes happened from the novella. Instead of 37 characters, there were 12. The film would start with the Norwegian helicopter chase as well. Lancaster had a lot of time to write his script, almost over a year, and during August through November 1980, John would go off to film Escape from New York, which we covered on this channel as well, so check that out. Gotta plug my work, folks. Anyways, during filming, John would often talk with Kurt Russell about the film, and Russell would give casting choice insights, and they would talk story ideas. Finally, during the fall of 1980, Bill Lancaster finished the first draft of his script. After Stuart Cohen read it, he got with John, and this is what was said. "This is the best script I've ever read. Are you in?" I asked. A pause, and then, "Oh yeah." At this point, Carpenter was pretty much the director for The Thing, and it was going to be his film. And in 1981, things would move fast in development for The Thing. And that means we're at the end of another video. Next Friday, we will continue on with part 2 of the series. We did want to take a moment to shout out a member of our channel who has been with us for some time. The name of his channel is writer Albert Lanier, and he focuses on, you guessed it, writing. So if you have a chance, check out his channel. There's a link in our video's description. We also wanted to go over the rest of our year's slate so you can know what's coming up. The Thing is expected to be a 5-part series, and after that, we will be doing Tron Legacy in October. November will be The Running Man, and in December, we will cover Predators. We plan to start out 2026 covering Tremors. So, there's a lot to look forward to. And with that, we will be short and sweet and end another video. We will see you next time. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, and so does sharing. We appreciate you being here.